Greetings, listeners, and welcome to On the Spectrum podcast, a show that explores the many complexities and diversities of being on the spectrum. We are your hosts, David and Lorena.
Hello, Dave.
Hello. And today we are joined by Daniel Toney.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No worries at all. Would you like to start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a trained actor. I'm a writer, and at the moment I'm rehearsing ready for my one-man show called Mine or Unapologetically Autistic.
Great title. I like it.
Nice.
Cool. Nice and snappy, to the point, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome.
Like unapologetically me. I like that kind of.
Yeah, literally just like, this is who I am. Just sort of accept it as it is.
Is that the basis of the show? Because you've seen the show?
Yeah, we saw the show with Nairobi. It was really good. Yeah. We had our moments of laugh, and I need to recognize another moment of, I'm going to cry, Daniel, don't do that to us.
Yeah, it gives you a mixture of different feelings throughout, I think. So it sort of gives sort of a humorous but also sort of candid, blunt depiction about what it means to be on the autistic spectrum at various phases of your life. So a lot of the show it sort of ranges from my initial upbringing when I got my diagnosis all the way up to sort of going into adult life, so university, like living independently. And so it's a sort of it's a relaying of different experiences that people can sort of observe it and sort of take things away from it.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, that's really
awesome.
good. So talk to us a little bit about how was your childhood being autistic?
Okay. Well, I would say I was definitely different. I was definitely a lot different to how I am now. I was definitely a lot quieter, a lot less confident in the way I would approach things. Luckily, I was fortunate enough to be diagnosed at the age of 3. So obviously, it was early enough where my family could put a lot of things in place to help me within school, within different places I would go. But of course, going through school, it was obviously very difficult to make friends or sort of get in with the social crowd. So I did often spend a lot of time sort of by myself in my own little world. I mentioned in the show that actually I spent a lot of time doing what I call daydreaming, where I would sort of pick a location, whether it was around a conker tree or whether it's just like a really isolated bit of the school, and I would just walk around it and I would just act out scenes with different cartoon characters. So I would pretend I was a space ranger or I was in Thunderbirds or something like that. And to me that was quite nice because obviously being on the spectrum, you like that aspect of control, or you like that aspect of sort of being able to sort of control your own reality. So for me that was quite helpful. But of course to everyone else not on the spectrum, especially kids of my age, it did look a little bit funny, a little bit weird to some people, I think.
Was it like regulating your emotions, or what do you think you got out of that?
I think a lot of it was learning how to learning how to process basic emotions, because like I said, I wasn't really sort of the most vocal with my peer group. I didn't really engage in conversations, and even when I did, a lot of it was mimicry, so a lot of it was just from things I'd heard or things I'd seen. So I'd sort of use those daydream times, the sort of safe spaces to sort of engage in my own conversations in a world that I was in control of and that I was in control of the reactions of, so I could sort of dictate how this world went. Mm-hmm. So I think on the one hand it was a bit of a learning curve, but on the other hand it was a bit of it was my safe space, sort of doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Fair enough. So do you think that's what led you into sort of drama and things in that area, the fact that you used to have these sort of characters in your head that you play with?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And definitely even picking it now, just picking up scripts and exploring new characters is something I really enjoy doing. Like I remember, my first experience of doing theatre, or sort of that passion to do theatre in school, was when we had a travelling theatre company come to see us at the primary school where I did a lot of this daydreaming stuff. And still I was quite vocal, I was quite quiet, and I ended up being picked as a volunteer to go up and help out on the stage. I was given the nickname Whatnot, which was quite funny. I had to do all these little things like assist, do magic tricks that would go wrong. Mm-hmm. And then after the show, I just remember all the older kids who I used to be really frightened of they came up to me and gave me massive pats on the back, and they would say, "Oh man, well done, you were really good," and everything. So I think that's sort of where I first sort of found the bug for it, and that sort of led me to where I am now, like writing my own show and being able to do it at both the Camden Fringe and the etc. at the end of this week.
That's great. That's great.
Because in that case, you say that people that they were not really keen on or really interested in what you were doing, just putting it on a stage in a theatre context, they were really willing to say, "Oh, well done, mate, you do really well." So how do you think your peers were with you in the school? How they behave with you, peers and teachers?
I think, and I talk a lot about this in the show, I think peers were a little bit, they sort of knew I was there, but they sort of didn't get why I was the way I was. Obviously, like, my childhood best friend and everything, the people that I regularly get together with, they sort of knew what I was like, and there were people that I could be comfortable around. But generally, in a classroom setting, I was often quite scared to speak up. I didn't really sort of have that voice in the classroom. So for me, it did feel quite daunting sort of putting myself in that position. And I think a lot of people knew that. And I think a lot of people, particularly in primary and secondary school, is something that people would like take advantage of and sort of take the mickey out of me for, especially like as I got older.
I remember in the show that you were mentioning secondary school was pretty hard for you, like, because I think the difference are even more obvious, and then they are more cruel. Would you say? Yeah,
there was a level of cruelness. I think, even if they didn't know they were being cruel. I mean, to them, I think they were just being themselves. But obviously, how it came across was quite cool. So I think there was one incident where, I wasn't really that good at sticking up for myself. So a couple of the older kids, they would like fall over and claim, "Oh, I pushed them," and obviously I didn't really sort of know how to vocalize a way to defend myself. So obviously I just started crying, like, really, and I was really upset. And I think they sort of realized, and they went like, "Oh no, like we might have taken this a bit too far." And so they were then trying to cheer me up, but then it was too late. So yeah, I think again, like at high school, the autistic side was the way I could sort of escape from all that, because a lot of them would sort of just do their own things. But the artist in me and like everyone, like all the other kids I knew that were into theatre, we got on really well, and that's sort of where I found my way to fit in high school, really. Okay. And of course, in high school we also had I was lucky that we had learning support as well, so I was enrolled in a lot of these like classes at lunchtime, and I would do like extra maths because of my neurotype. It made it quite maths was quite difficult for me in school, and I would go to learning support at lunchtimes. I would just like do comprehensions and things. So there were other things throughout the school that could really sort of help me understand a bit more what it meant to be in the wider world, as a neurodiverse person. Realizing that I could definitely go into further education in a way where I could solely focus on theatre. That could become my almost obsession, as a lot of autistic people have, like an obsession with some things. My obsession was with acting and performing in the arts section, because it's an area where I felt really safe. It's somewhere I enjoyed doing. I could sort of be creative without that fear of judgment, and that helped. Yes. That helped with a lot of things. And definitely as I got older, I started to become a little bit more, definitely more creative in terms of writing. So even when I got to university, I'd write shows with friends. At acting school, we would create things together, and even last year, writing the script for this show and getting it on at Camden. So yeah, it's I've sort of gradually started to broaden the horizons a bit more. Mm-hmm. I think.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're putting yourself like fully into it and investing heavily.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be, really, if you're an out-of-work actor, you sort of just got to throw yourself at everything and try new things. And a piece of advice we were given at acting school is, obviously, if you're not being cast in a few things, obviously you should try writing your own things, or try making your own work to put on stage. So I thought, yeah, I'll give that a go. What's the worst that could happen?
Nothing really.
No, not really.
You're having a great time, that sounds like things, yeah.
Right, so one thing that I remember as well from the show is that you were talking about your experience with girls, your first experience. That was like quite funny and sweet to hear, because I think sometimes when we talk about autism, many people, and probably many people in the audience, will think about children that they are quite severe, they have quite big difficulties to live on their own, but it's not always the case. And then they are like functional adults, they have their lives, they go to school, they go to university, and obviously they have experiences with girls as everybody else and every single teenager in the world. Tell us, because we had a good laugh in the show with you at that time. I remember that.
Oh yeah. Well, as I mentioned in the show, I was absolutely hopeless, like both in primary school and secondary school. I just didn't have a clue, and obviously
sorry, I think it's how most of us feel anyway. So.
but it's just. But I think it's even worse. I think it's even worse when you're autistic, because obviously you've got to put yourself out there and sort of take that risk, in terms of love and relationships. And obviously, I didn't really sort of have that incentive to do that. And as I mentioned in the show, I spent a lot of my time in the shadows, and I mentioned that anecdote where I once sent 2 Valentine's Day cards to 2 different girls just because A, I didn't have a clue, B, I think I was just indecisive, and then obviously I got chased by loads of girls around the school and I didn't really know why. But yeah, it was just like I had no idea. So when I first when I ended up in my first relationship as a teenager, I was just like, oh, wow, right, so this is what everybody's kicking up a fuss about, eh? So this is what all the cool kids are doing, isn't it? But yeah, it was sort of it was quite a sudden introduction, but it was a massive learning curve for me in terms of that level of interaction and that level of investment that you can put in other people, which at the time I don't really think I had, apart from obviously investing a lot of time in really close friends and family, like in that investment in relationships and sort of how to navigate relationships. Obviously I didn't really have a clue until that point, and obviously then that breakup, obviously then knowing what heartbreak is, and then teenage level of heartbreak anyway. And then going on to that next stage of life, sort of knowing the kind of things you can expect, like the little signs you look for. So when you notice that a person likes you, and when you know to talk to another person, when that person's not interested. So I think throughout that first relationship, even though it was a bit weird, obviously there were a lot of cues I picked up from it that I was then able to take forward.
Certainly. So it's like it was growing.
Yeah.
So it's something that at least contributed to towards you understanding the intimacy and like you said, the investment that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a massive learning curve, as well as the the empathy side of it as well, like understanding those complicated feelings.
Who was there to help you out, like on all of this? Because normally teenagers talk between each other with a group of friends. They avoid to us. Advice to mom and dad in these cases. Who was there to help you out? Like, who was there to support and to set those conversations of, she said this or she did that, and then I'm not sure, because we all had this conversation when we were 16, I think, at some point.
I mean, in terms of that relationship, I think definitely, my dad was a big person I would try and talk to about it, obviously, because, being a teenage boy, that's the only person you can kind of feel like you can talk to. Yeah. But also it was also really sort of handy, because I have a younger sister as well, obviously, sort of, and she was obviously on the dating scene as well, so obviously she could give me a lot of tips, in terms of socializing and sort of things to look for in girls. But also, I had really close friends, or people that know me really well, that I knew that were in relationships that I could sort of ask these questions about, and they would actually answer it no problem, really. So I think I had a very small but helpful support network in terms of navigating relationships, or navigating the dating scene.
That's great. Do you think your work in drama helped you with empathy and putting yourself in other people's shoes, things of that nature? Did you think that is that another thing that maybe why you gravitated towards it was because it was sort of exploring that aspect that you were having trouble with?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think anyone on the spectrum, I think definitely being on the stage or reading scripts or learning about characters, that's a really handy way for anyone on the spectrum to sort of grow a bit more in confidence, because you read about these really intricate characters, you start to understand their thoughts and their feelings, and you perform through their voices, and the more you perform in their voice, the more you have that understanding about them, especially like when you get into the more theoretical aspect of performing arts, when you cover theory for GCSEs or A levels, and you start to learn about their truer feelings, their intentions, the subtext. You understand a little bit more about. You will learn a little bit more about sort of the human aspect of being a performer as well. Sort of how these characters how to sort of embody these characters and sort of give them off in a way that it's not just the character, it's also you through that character as well. So you start to see a little bit of your personality coming through these people. So I definitely think that theatre is a really good way for those on the spectrum to understand empathy and sort of grow with it as well. And inadvertently, you also learn sort of how to speak for yourself, because you have these scripted conversations. And I think I mentioned in the show, a lot of conversations, especially for younger autistic kids, is like being given a script, opening it up and discovering it's blank. So you sort of feel like there is a sort of improvised feel to your conversations, and you're a bit like, so you sort of like stumble and trip over it. And I think the more time you spend with scripted characters, the more time you spend learning about them, the easier it becomes for you to form your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own speech patterns, your own voice, as it were. Because then you think, I spend a lot of time talking in this character's voice. What happens if I try and be myself for a bit, or if I talk as myself?
Yeah, those levels of also practicing improvisation and things like that, I'd probably come in handy in your everyday discussions, because if you're improvising with your peers in a drama group, then it's transferable skill. Towards social groups.
Absolutely, yeah. Even smaller improv games you do in drama studios, they're definitely helpful in terms of social situations as well, because you're going to be presented with situations like that on a day-to-day basis. You're going to be presented with the unpredictable. Some things might not go as planned. So there is that sort of mechanism in place, in case that happens, where you have that mental preparedness to navigate around it. So I think drama games and scripted characters are really useful.
That's great. Yeah.
Interesting.
I've been sort of studying up on drama therapy recently and things like that, and I think there's a lot of applications there. And like you said, especially for people on the spectrum that want to start to understand these things, or at least practice these kind of skills, it's a good, safe environment for them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, even when writing, because I wrote my thesis at university about drama therapy and the autistic spectrum, and just reading through all these all these different techniques, and reading through sort of how it applies to the wider theoretical side of autism, like what Professor Simon Baron-Cohen studies at Cambridge University, what he teaches at university, and looking at all these different workshops, and it's just remarkable to sort of see the impact and the reactions you get from those that identify as neurodiverse, and sort of seeing how in turn that sort of led them to feel a little bit more confident and sort of find their own voices in the world because of that.
Certainly, and it's all like no medication. It's all just it's just through practice and through psychology almost, isn't it? In a way, And I think it's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, so it's that learned behaviour. Well, once you sort of get into that pattern of this is how you deal with this, then you can sort of go out into the world having those expectations and knowing how to prepare for it.
That's great.
Like practicing a context that is under your control, or one that you practice a lot, then you can go to the not as controlled as, which I think is what we face.
The
face.
neurons in your brain have started to make that connection, and you've started to exercise, your ability to do that. So,
yeah, exactly.
That's really good.
That's fascinating. I like that.
So about uni, because you said that your best period was when you were at uni.
Absolutely.
What make it really, really good? It was people. It was the environment.
It was definitely those things, and I would say definitely the sort of semi-independent side of things. So the fact that I wasn't going home to my home in the Midlands, going home to my parents every night. The fact that I sort of had my own digs, my own accommodation, sort of my own chance to sort of find where I fit in a sort of semi-controlled environment. So, like you do when you go to university, you throw yourself at everything you find interested in. You throw yourself at all the big societies, and actually, I ended up meeting my best friend through various recalls that we would go to, and I just remember us both being very unsuccessful at the time, but meeting all these people and sort of starting to network as you do when you're an artist, that became really useful. And of course, actually getting a bigger group of friends, or a group of friends with a bit more understanding, or a group of friends that had the same intense interest, that was something that was really useful as well. Like I mentioned, that obviously the biggest one for me was Gilbert and Sullivan. So that was the musical opera society. Like you had the big musical theatre stuff, the big acting stuff, but I think Gilbert and Sullivan was sort of where it was for people with a keen interest in musical opera, but it's sort of where you went if you didn't really fit in. And I ended up going there by colossal accident. My best friend, we were walking back from one of our failed recalls, and he just said, "Oh, I've joined this. I've joined this society called Gilman Sullivan, but they're really short on boys. Do you want to come along for a taster session?" I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll see what it's like." And then I went along. Best decision I ever made, because I ended up meeting loads of really new people with that same intense interest. Like we then ended up like we did like 3 shows together over 3 years. We would do loads of little concerts. We would hang out. We'd go on beach trips. We'd go to the pub every Tuesday night. So it became almost like a family network. So that intense investment with other people. That's sort of where I learned how it sort of felt and how it could feel really fantastic with that big group of friends that sort of had that same interest. So I would definitely say it's where I was sort of started to become my happiest. It's where I sort of started to come into my own.
It's interesting you said, do you think that your independence had something to do with that as well? Because you're kind of, because I was the same at uni. It was the first time I was away from home and sort of learning how to deal with money and deal with people, because you didn't have anyone to back you up and stuff, So do you think that sort of helped it as well? Because you gained your independence, and then, like you said, you went out for projects that you were really interested in, and then you found like-minded people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, indeed. So it's where I started to sort of learn, as I said, where I fit into the world, or where I fit amongst other people without that safety net, or without parents or teachers sort of trying to sort of nudge at me to be what I am. So I was able to sort of find my own feet and sort of structure my own routine in a way that I was comfortable with, and actually. And I felt much better for it. So I started eating it, because I wasn't overweight, but I wasn't really thin when I went to university. But I started monitoring what I was eating a bit more. I started doing a lot more fitness. There was a gym literally around the corner from where I lived in second year, so I would go there. I would be there quite a lot. I think generally I was happy at university. There were aspects where I started to do, I suppose, what a lot of experts call like masking. Because obviously that's a term that's been associated with autism a lot now. I did do some quite a bit of masking here and there, but I would definitely say like a good 90 to 95% of the time I was generally happier there.
Yeah.
And yourself.
Yeah,
which is what matters, is it? Like, you don't need to mask or hide behind anything. It's being able to be myself, which is what it should be.
I'll say the only thing specifically, like from first year to second year, I would say there was that skepticism to admit or to just outright say that I was autistic, because as I mentioned in the show, because of school and primary school and like college-esque experiences, and even like with groups outside of school, there was always that level of sort of hostility and reluctance to sort of learn anything or to try and understand anyone that was different. So obviously being met with all that, there was always that thought at the back of my head going, oh, like, should I tell anyone, or should I admit to anyone that I was autistic? And straight away I went to no. So for the first year of meeting all these new people, I never admitted to any of them that I was autistic. I just sort of kept that to myself. I think people knew I was different, but they couldn't really sort of put their finger on it.
Sure.
But then after that first year, once I had these friends and they actually, they accepted me as I am, I thought, okay, I think, I trust them enough where I can actually talk to them about it. And I said to them, oh yeah, I'm on the autistic spectrum. And a lot of them just went, oh my God, I never knew that about you. So it came as a big surprise to them, but that didn't really sort of change how they felt about me. But then when I realised, actually, there are people out there in the world that you can say you're autistic and they will accept you.
Nothing happened.
Yeah.
It's a big difference from the peers that you were experiencing at secondary school, for example. Yeah. You just felt like it was more accepting, sort of like vibe?
There was a sense of euphoria for me personally that came with that acceptance at university, especially in this world where you sort of, you're trying to be yourself and sort of learning where you're fitting. The fact that you could be accepted out in the world with a group of people where you weren't being monitored all the time, that was one of the greatest sort of sensations I had when I said that, and people just went, okay, fine, you are as you are. Let's get back to hanging out.
Yeah, that's great.
That's brilliant.
That's nice.
Because uni is a big step. Because here in England and Spain, we normally stay at home. If you're at home, you stay at home. It's not like you do a massive change unless you live in a little village and then you need to go to a big town to be at uni. But for you guys, I know it's a big change. How your family lived that change?
I think my family were. I think they were initially sort of. I think they were initially anxious about it, or they were quite scared of it. Obviously, their firstborn child who also happens to be neurodivergent, going off to try and be independent for a bit. And I think their worry came from the concern that potentially there wasn't a lot of about independent living or university life that I might understand, which is sort of fair enough. Not everybody understands things at first, about independent living, especially when you're neurodiverse. So I'd say, but they were generally really happy. They didn't try, and they never tried to control my career. They never said, there's no money in art, you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or anything. They were genuinely very accepting of my career choice, and they did everything they could to support it. So, they would drive me to rehearsals, we would go to concerts and things. So, generally they knew what made me the happiest. And they accepted me for it, which was probably like the biggest blessing I could think of in terms of pursuing a career in the arts. But back to the question about university. I would say they just wanted to make sure that steps were in place to ensure that I wasn't going to flounder too much, like in a newer educational environment. So a lot of things came from making my statement standing out, and obviously applying for the DSA. But yeah, it just meant I would put my case forward. I mentioned what kind of educational needs I might need, any like bits of equipment I might need, and a lot of the things I got were really useful. So I ended up getting a new laptop with like loads of speech to text software and support software on it, which could help me if I was in lectures. I got a dictaphone in case I needed to record lectures, in case I missed anything. I got a really cheap printer in case I needed to print off any resources. So generally that made things a lot easier, because I felt more prepared. I didn't run around in the morning thinking, oh my god, I haven't got this on my lecture. Oh my god, I can't do this. Oh my god, my laptop keeps crashing left, right, and centre. What am I going to do? So there was less of a sense of panic when I started, which I think would have been different if I hadn't been fortunate enough to be accepted for a DSA.
Yeah, so that really did help you, just giving you that sort of support foundation for your day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it was a good starting point. So when I actually started to go to lectures, go to seminars, I had the steps in place to ensure that I could understand everything and get everything down. And as well, I would have these meetings that we eventually got accepted to have these meetings at specific times at university, where I go to it was like a learning support at university, where I go and sit one-to-one with someone, and we talk about how I'm coping with university life. Anything could be different. Okay. Yeah, so it's like a mini counselling session almost.
Okay,
that's nice. Yeah, I didn't know that kind of stuff was in place, but that's quite nice.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact name for it, but you would go to the campus, and you would have set appointments, and you would go for a meeting with one-to-one with someone. And we would just talk about how generally things were going, or how I was coping.
We're talking about how now that you still have that sort of that focus and that engagement with your imagination, but now you apply it to more practical things in your life.
Yeah, some more things to do, like a lot of what if scenarios. So a lot of what if the show goes like this on the Sunday, or what if I miss my last train back, or what's the week going to be like at work? So sort of playing out those scenarios in my head of the sort of the most immediate probability. Or if you're going for a night out, so we could start here, but we'll end up going here and here and here. I might say this to this person, I might not say this to this person. So it's a lot of mental planning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you were saying that your original intent behind doing that was because you could control it, and now you're kind of you're trying to come up with sort of bullet points for the evening, just so you have that. Again, I'm not speaking for you, but I'm just saying, do you think there's a control element there as well?
In a way, sort of if I know I'm meeting a particular person, I sort of know what we might talk about. We might talk about their family life, any projects they're working on, their new jobs. So, I'm sort of mentally stocking up with sort of things to know to ask them about. Being an actor and a performer, I think every actor has those what ifs. What if they got cast in this particular role, or if they miss out on an audition, they were how would I play this differently? And that actually happened. I did a script read for a show that ended up on Channel 4 for this character that was implied to be neurodiverse. And I watched it, and I spotted the character who it was. I was like, okay, they're playing that a bit differently to how I would have done it.
Right.
Yeah, and I sort of think, right, if I was in that scene, if I was that character, how would I have done it?
Yeah, because again, you said earlier that you kind of put a bit of yourself into the character, and that probably makes the character a lot more authentic if there's something real behind what's happening.
Yeah, there's something real, and there's like a sense of I don't know if this makes sense, but there's a sense of sort of practicality within that character as well. Like how would you take it a little bit further potentially if you could?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, it's just sort of like playing those ideas in your mind. Yeah,
exactly.
That's interesting. That's why I asked, because I thought that maybe it's at the time you said it was beneficial for you to do that, but you practiced it so much that you're able to sort of switch into it now as an adult, and it's something that still has some benefits.
Yeah, there's a bit more of a seamless transition now in terms of social situations. Obviously, being 26 and obviously having a really close like friendship group. I think you sort of have to be now. You sort of have to keep track of what everybody's doing. Like there are some friends I haven't seen for months on end. So when I know we're having catch-ups, I'm thinking, right, what was this person doing recently? Oh yeah, they were away on holiday doing this, or oh yeah, they were in this show. So I know sort of like the primary topics to know to ask them about, and then just sort of let things flow from there.
Yes, sure.
Yeah,
that's nice as well. You're practically thinking about other people and about how you can engage with them and what their interests are.
Yeah,
and then allowing the conversation, but you've got that as like a baseline.
Yeah, and things come from that. Like,
sure.
For example, if someone's talking about, like, for example, I was seeing a friend's indie band the other night in Shoreditch. And I think I might ask him. Oh yeah, you went back to Romania. How were things there? And he might talk about. Oh yeah, this particular Romanian dish. Oh, I've never had that before. What's that like? And then they talk about these things. And like, oh, is there anywhere else around Romania that might be really nice to go to on holiday? And they talk. Oh, I've never been to this area. What's that like? So it's like a tree slowly being planted. All these like little sub branches coming up. Just like, oh yeah, I can ask about this and this and this and this. So a lot more things can grow from it if you sort of invest that time in that one thing. If that makes sense.
No, of course, yeah, I get you. Yeah.
Talking about that, all of these are like strategies that you put in place at some point, and then you've been practice all those years, like you master them.
Yeah.
What strategies would you say that they taught you when you were a child? So for those ones that they are listening to us and they are autistic or parents or professionals, so what would you say that it helped you out to go through all these years, and it was key things that you would say?
Key things. Oh, that's a very good question. I would say probably a lot of why I was able to sort of survive, as it were, like throughout primary school and secondary school, was just that willingness to try things just to see what could work, because there's always that temptation when you're on the spectrum, when you don't have that confidence, or when you're not really that vocal, to sort of stay in the background and not really sort of say anything. But I think trying is a necessity, just so you sort of know where you stand with that particular thing anyway. So you try getting to know people. If it doesn't pay off, okay, fair enough. You find other people that do get to know you. You try auditioning for this society at university. They don't want you. Fair enough. Just move on to the next one. But I would say it's just having that willingness to sort of test the water, because the more you test yourself, the more you learn where you're more confident, the more you learn about the type of people you want to be around a lot more, I would say. I mean, in terms of social situations, I would say if you're on the spectrum, obviously, trying to process a lot of information, I would say continual investment, or just sort of knowing about people's lives, or always finding things that they talk about to ask about, if that makes sense. So, you might be a conversation in a pub with someone, just really, helping others feel like they're being heard, because then when you help them in that way, and when they talk and when they're giving you something back, you feel like you're learning more.
Sure. You may learn more about that person, and like you said, you've got more of those bullet points to go to when you're having conversations with them that will engage them.
Yeah.
And like you said, will spread the seed.
I find it interesting to I find other people interesting. I enjoy learning more about other people. To sort of see what kind of things they do, what kind of hobbies they're in. So I enjoy that continual investment in other people to sort of learn a bit more about what they're like, because I'm not only learning about them, I'm also learning a bit more about myself, because I'm also thinking, oh, this is how I behave around certain people, or this is how I process that particular piece of information, or this is where I learn about different people's views or my views. So I would say it's definitely use those interactions as a chance to learn, or use those as learning experiences, because, like I said, you learn more not only about other people, you learn more about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. What would you say to your classmates if you were back to school and then you had them all in front of you? What would you say to them now as an adult?
Walking around conker trees is normal.
That's a good shout.
No, I would say if I could say anything to my class at school, I would say just be curious. It's like I say in the show, be curious. It's what Whitman said: be curious, not judgmental. If someone's doing something a little bit different, don't look at them and think, "Oh, that person's a bit weird. I don't really want anything to do with them." Be a little bit more curious and ask them why they're doing it, or see if you can sort of gauge why they're doing it. Don't be afraid to just be curious rather than just jump straight to being judgy.
And then probably apply your rule. Try what they are doing. You were saying you need to try and expose yourself and give a go to the world. Mm-hmm. I would say to them as well, give a go to what that person is doing, because maybe enrolling or engaging with them in the game or in the is as well a way to discover something new.
Exactly. You might learn more about other people. You might learn about this person rather than just the desire to constantly take the piss out of this person.
Certainly, and I feel what you're saying, because a lot of the children we work with are non-verbal, but the time that I've established sort of meaningful relationships has been when you see those moments where you're, like you said, you're curious. It's almost like an investigation. Like, why is this happening? Why is he getting upset about this? And then what is it about this that he loves so much? And then when you engage in that intensive interaction with them, and you start to sort of realize where the enjoyment is in them, because they can't verbally tell you. So I think what you're saying is I think that's very on the nose and very on point.
Yeah.
You need to just sort of be curious about, if you're not understanding something, then. And sometimes you don't need to understand it, but if you can engage in it a little bit, then you'll start to understand aspects of it.
There's always that. Also, with people neurotypical, I mean, particularly at that age or that particular time, there was always that compulsion to just be insanely hostile towards people that were different. Like in the show, I talk about a particular group of friends who obviously I'm not going to name, but. The second I sort of mentioned I was autistic to this, or the second they knew about it, they sort of didn't really want anything to do with me. Like, they weren't really curious. They just went to being straightly judgmental. They just went to, oh, this person's got something different. That makes him a problem. We don't really want to hang out with him. To a point where I wasn't really sort of invited to things like that concerned like the massive groups of people that I talk about in the show, like a big party that everybody was hosting, and I was one of the only people that didn't get invited, and another boy didn't get invited as well, and coincidentally we both had autism. And he decided to go on Facebook and send an email to the group saying, why wasn't I invited to this thing? And then somebody, they came back, and I swear to God, this was the actual response. This one person came back and said, oh, just because you're autistic, you think you get special treatment, do you? So
really, so it took the other side of it.
There was that default. They just went to be insanely nasty.
No, that's cruel. Yeah, that
it's cool. But bullying is a kind of thing that obviously it just exists in every school, and it's something that, especially as parents, you always worry about and things happening. But at the end of the day, I was, I got bullied at school as well, and kids can be quite harsh, especially at that age, because that level of understanding isn't there. They don't understand like what's going on. But like you said, if they were curious, then they would have a totally different approach to what was going on in those situations.
Yeah. Even just how the world looks on autism now, like nowadays, is really different to how it was, back when when we were at school. I was having a conversation with one of my best friends, actually, someone who came to the show. And they were talking about apparently it was a trend at their school. Like, say for example, if somebody was being stupid, you would say to that person, "Are you autistic?" That was like their pet name for someone that was like a pet name for somebody that was like a pet name for someone that was stupid.
Yeah, no. Exactly.
You would say, "Hey, are you autistic?"
And it's kind of like it's just it's like the dark side of labeling, isn't it? Because obviously there's a good side to being labeled, because it helps you sort of understand yourself a bit more, and it helps you get the support in place and things like that. But then there's this other, there's that side of it, and again, I think it just comes from people that just don't have the understanding or the empathy to sort of deal with that. So they just, like you said, we're kind of like, oh, I'm an invisible person now. You know?
Yeah, and I think as well, like, you know, myself and a lot of other kids that were diagnosed at the same sort of time when I was, we're sort of a product of a period of time when a lot about autism, particularly in social situations and upbringing, and schooling wasn't really truly understood. So obviously, you know, there is I don't want to use the word malice, but there's that sense of bitterness you have when you look back and think, oh yeah, like this is how we were treated when we were younger. Obviously now everything's a bit hunky dory now. So I guess there is a little bit of jealousy for the generation nowadays that sort of get to grow up with that kindness, with that understanding, with that empathy. And sort of one of the subtle things I try and say with the show is that, you know, this is how I was treated with autism back then. Now things are a little bit better, and that's great. But this is just a reminder of how far we've come.
Sure.
This is a reminder of how people with autism used to get treated at this point in time. But nowadays things are getting a little bit better, and there's more representation within things. So it sort of shows that evolution of autistic treatment and representation, you know, both, you know, in life and in the media.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, that's what I mean. It is catching up, isn't it? And it is starting to.
Yeah, but it's what we're talking about as well in the car. But it's even though that there is lots of representation, we are out there, we are pushing, we are showing, we are saying this is what it is. You still have someone that says, "Oh, are you autistic? You don't look autistic." It's like, and how it looks like autistic, or how I need to look like to meet your expectations about autism.
Do you want me to do an autism for you or something?
Yeah,
like the autism show kind of thing, just to tick all your.
I'm giving you no eye contact. Let me just find my empathy switch. Yeah, that's all there. Anything else you want? Do you want me to name all the Pokemon in alphabetical order? Do you? In the order with which they were drawn.
That's the perspective that I keep hearing.
Can you do that?
Yeah, nearly.
That would be amazing.
But when I was working with autistic children, and people would come up and say, "Oh, have you got one that's really good at maths, or have you got one that's really..." And so those perceptions are still going around as well, when you've got those sort of stereotypical views on what it is.
Yeah, obviously. And the biggest one, of course, I think we were talking about this earlier on, was Rain Man. That's the biggest stereotype that people go to. Whereas actually, when you look at other forms of media or other shows, like you have the A Word, you have Atypical, that series on Amazon, you have The Good Doctor. Which I think As We See It, that's also there as well. You know, a lot wider depictions of autism, you know, with different individuals. I remember me and my partner, we recently just picked up watching The A Word a couple of months ago. We literally binge watched it.
The A Word.
The A Word. So it's a really good series on iPlayer that I got really into, about a young boy that's diagnosed with autism, and his family try to find ways to cope with it.
Okay.
And there are a lot of things I observe. We watched the show, and I'll sort of pause things halfway through, just like, hang on, this is technically how they might do it. They might do it like this, or hang on, that's not how stimming works. They do it like this. So I would like pause it, and I would like try and explain things to my partner when she sort of didn't quite get things.
Right.
But it was just interesting to see that take on autism and the dynamic that neurotypical characters had with that one person that was autistic.
Certainly.
I watched the Atypical and the Good Doctor, and with the Atypical I had a good laugh. Yeah.
And there's another.
What do you think about those?
I mean, Freddie Highmore's depiction of someone with autism and savant syndrome is a really interesting take, because it's a different side of autism that has more to do with the coping of it. So he does a lot of stimming. He regulates himself in a particular way. He has that obsession, which I think makes him quite identifiable, and sort of the way he sees the world, like through a supercomputer brain and everything. Yeah. And also, I don't know if you've seen it. There's a series called As We See It. And that's it's about 3 autistic adults sort of in care. So 3 autistic adults that are sort of trying to find their way in the world. One of them's really blunt and sort of doesn't really display much empathy. One of them is really sensitive to social situations, like won't really leave the house. The other one is like quite forward and quite obsessed, like with a particular aspect of being adult, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say on the podcast, but yeah. So it's Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm miming it for listeners. You can probably guess what it is, but that side of things, they're quite obsessed with that. But it's three adults.
SEX.
SEX. There we go. But it's three adults with different obsessions, and obviously you have the carers and people surrounding the carers as well that sort of are there on hand to help these adults with various things that they need. So it not only explores the autistic individual, the neurodiverse individuals, but it also looks at people's lives around that as well, like how carers help those on the spectrum, how carers' relatives are affected with those on the spectrum, how relationships are developed with those on the spectrum. So it's an interesting dynamic, I think, to have with these different characters.
No, that's really good. We'll definitely watch it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go watch.
Right, so moving forward, one thing that you talked about in the show as well, and we have a good laugh. Well, we laugh because at some point it's like you don't know if to cry or laugh or get angry when we were hearing you. How was the work life for you? Because you talk about interviews and your experience in interviews when you are debating between, should I say that I'm autistic? Shouldn't I say that I'm autistic? You even were offered a Kit Kat at some point.
That was a fun interview. That was a fun interview. As you do, obviously, especially with neurodiverse individuals, they find it really hard to find employment, particularly within their skill set. In a similar way to how some organisations, so how school kids find people that mention they're autistic. So, like I mentioned earlier on, oh, this person mentioned they're autistic. This means they're very complicated, which means we don't really want anything to do with them. That can apply to job interviews as well sometimes. And nowadays they have diversity department. They have diversity segments within the application forms, outline any reasonable adjustments. For me personally, it was always a bit of a hit or miss as to whether or not to say anything, because sometimes I would, sometimes I wouldn't, depending on sort of how self-conscious I felt going into a job interview. And one particular incident in question, I had actually decided to disclose I was autistic. And we went through the interview. They asked me about my autism, and I talked about how I've overcome a lot of social barriers with it and how I feel like I'm right for the role because of what my autism brings to the table. Sure. A bunch of other interview questions and everything, and not really much was said. And then they just went to the drawer and they pulled out a Kit Kat bar and gave me a Kit Kat bar. And I didn't really sort of know what to make of it.
That is a very...
It was a bit weird.
Yes.
It was a bit strange. Like, I didn't really know. I went back to the train station not knowing what to take away from that. I was a bit like, did I get the job? Is this some sort of way of letting me down? I didn't get that particular job, so right. A bit of a swing and a miss depending on where you go with it. But other jobs, as I mentioned in this show, it sort of depends on sort of what society thinks that neurodiverse people are good for. Yes. I mean, a lot of the jobs I had leading up to what I'm doing now were a lot of a lot of catering stuff. I mean, as you do when you're an actor as well, you do a lot of catering stuff. You do waiting, you do bar stuff. I was mainly pot washer orientated things, and there was a very particular incident. Actually, I do talk about the show, which I do get quite vocal about. Spoiler alert. That there was an incident where I was a pot washer in a job, and there was essentially an arse load of washing up to do. It's like you know in films when you walk into a kitchen and there's like dishes piled up and you wonder how the main character is going to clean all of it within a lot of time. It was a little bit like that, and nobody was really assisting me. They were all outside the front having a laugh, like talking about what they were going to do in a night out. And I'm doing this job. I'm trying to get it done as fast as I can, but visibly I look annoyed. So I sort of look a little bit like this. I sort of look a bit visibly annoyed. And then when it comes to the kitchen, they sort of clock that and they sort of see I look visibly annoyed. And then I come in the next day, having done all the cleaning and stuff, and then somebody takes me to the side and tells me that I've been put on suspension because I've apparently been scaring the older ladies in the kitchen.
Oh my god!
But I was doing an arse load of washing up with no help. I asked for help several times. No, I didn't do a Egyptian like clapping your hands and demanding assistance. I asked for assistance, didn't get any. I looked quite annoyed while I was finishing the job. I then come in the next day and then I get told I'm put on suspension because I'm scaring the older ladies in the kitchen, but by looking visibly annoyed at something that was out of my control. I mean, I could have chosen to just be like that. I could have chosen to be deadpan, but I just decided to show my frustration through I look.
Yeah.
But my question is, if the same situation happened to a person that is neurotypical, like definitely you were overloaded, without help, not treated in the right way, meanwhile everybody was laughing and, you know, having a good time, you were still working, things weren't being said in a fair way. I think I'm a neurotypical person and I will be fuming. That's the word. Fuming. And even when you don't say anything, I think my face sometimes can say everything for me.
Yeah.
I don't think my face will be like neutral, poker, you know, like
Yes.
I mean,
it's okay, just bring more.
I mean, I guess.
Will I be suspended in the same way?
I guess my mistake was thinking that people would have common sense, like they would just like walk in and see there's one person doing all this stuff and not think to go, want some help? Yeah, so I think my mistake was thinking that having that expectation that somebody would come in and be like, oh yeah, we need to get out of here, I'll help you with this, but no, didn't happen. And I guess if it was someone a bit more neurotypical, I guess they might have sort of been heard a bit more. But I was just focused on getting the job done. I was focused on not abandoning this task and actually getting it completed so we could all be out of here.
Yeah,
because
it's interesting how that you didn't really get that back though.
No,
you put in all that effort, and then the next day. I mean, how did you respond when he said, "Oh, you're being suspended because your face didn't look right"? I mean, it seems very illogical to me.
I didn't really sort of know what to say. I didn't even really say much at that point. When I had the look of Satan in my face, I think I may have made the odd comment saying, "Yep, just trying to get it done as fast as I can. Be nice if someone could help." Something like that. Something like that. So they told me that. I just worked the rest of that shift I turned up for, and then I just went home.
Yeah.
And then that was it. To be fair, I mean, afterwards, when I eventually got a new job afterwards, I was quite lucky because the previous boss of that place where I worked, I did write to them saying, "Oh, would you be able to? I'd be very grateful if you could give me a reference for this next job." And very kindly he did.
Right.
So he did. So he helped me. He helped me to get my next job. But at the time when I was working at this previous place, I think there was just that lack of understanding.
Sure. Yeah.
I think I was speaking to a person that is autistic as well, and she was mentioning that in the previous job that she had, I always tell this story because it shocked me quite. Like I was quite annoyed by her. I was on her side, on her behalf. I was really frustrated because I found it really unfair. It's like she finds difficult to understand sometimes certain social contexts and social some faces and emotions, feelings. So if someone sometimes she gives a response to a situation that is not the right response, but she doesn't see clearly why. So she, according to her bosses, she was passive aggressive, but for her, she just answered straightforward a question that was made straightforward as well. So if you ask me a straightforward question, I will answer straightforward as well. And then she was accused of being passive aggressive. Yes. But she couldn't understand why she was passive aggressive. Yeah. So she asked the manager, "Okay, so tell me what happened, what I did, and I can figure out next time how to not respond like that."
Yeah.
No, we can't tell you that. But if you cannot tell me what I did wrong, how I'm going to correct myself for the next or future situations.
Yeah, if they don't tell you what's wrong.
And then, they were like pretty much doing her life help just because she was autistic. She opened up saying, I am. And then they were trying just to probably get rid of her because it was easier. And then when she was mentioning it to me, I said, "Look, you just need to know key people around you that if these situations are coming a weird way, let's say it that way, someone will help you and say, wait, this is a misunderstanding. Let's reward the situation. Let's rephrase this. I don't think she means to be rude. She can come across in a rude way for the other side.
There's that bluntness that comes with it.
But it's not actually what she really means to. And just like, let's rephrase and reward and everything clear up. And I said to her, don't worry, just keep people around you that at some point you can say like, can you come and give me a hand? And then sort it. But I think it was that simple. It's like, I'm Spanish. I need some help to write some emails sometimes.
Guy on for our first podcast, what was it? Andy Reid, and he works. He's like a coach for neurodivergent people. And what he said was very interesting about what you guys are discussing about how if the understanding is there within the group in the workplace, these kind of misunderstandings it doesn't have to escalate into these kind of levels if people are just aware of, this person may come across as rude, but that's just, for lack of a better phrase, that's their style. That's just the way they are as a person, to try and sort of kind of de-escalate these situations.
It's that assumption that somebody neurodiverse in the workplace is going to somehow cause trouble or be troubling. Is that old cliche? And I think that's a lot of why a lot of neurodiverse people are afraid to disclose their neurodiversity in the workplace, because of their treatment. Because if you don't say you're neurodiverse, they'll treat you one way, and that might overwhelm you. But if you do say you're neurodiverse, they might treat you another way that may come across as insanely condescending or patronizing, because they don't quite know how to deal with it. So it's a case of it's a you're damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
It's a tricky one. Andy was saying is what Dave was saying. You need to come. I think it's two parts coming together to the middle. It's not that not one or another. It needs to be both together. It's like, if I want to understand you, like, you need to come across and say, look, this is my difficulty, or these are my difficulties, or I might need help with this, and then I say, okay, how I can help you, let me know how, and then I will do, and I will make sure it happens. Is what I was saying. Like, if I am not English and I need to write a really formal letter, I will always ask a colleague to say, like, can you read this? Can you tell me if it sounds good to you, if it sounds English? Because as we compose things in a different way, the sentences are made in a different way. So you always say, like, does it sound English to you? That I need help with that. I can ask for the help, and I'm being given the help. In the same way, you come across and say, look, I've got difficulties can you help me out? And then I need to come towards you and be, as you said,
it's like neurotypical people understanding neurodiversity, and neurodiversity having some flexibility to understand neurotypical. And when you get that balance right, that's what he was advocating, that when you get that balance right, that the workplace becomes.
And I think neurodiverse people take a little bit longer to process, neurotypical individuals, just because it's a new place of work, it's a new environment, it's a new duty, you can meet all these new people, they might operate differently, so you're trying to learn a lot about people in a very short space of time. So it's like going to do your GCSEs and revising the morning of. Right. Like, you're trying to take in all that information. You get there, you're like, who's the person again? What do I have to do again? And then that's where I think the overwhelming side of things can come, and that's probably why people with neurodiversity in the workplace might sometimes struggle.
No, and I completely understand. Like, I understand why people don't want to disclose. This is what Andy was saying. Like, most of the neurodivergent people don't want to disclose they are neurodivergent because they know they're going to be treated in a different way. So they'd rather be making lots of effort of masking and trying to hide. Because we're saying, but this is not fair, because at the end of the day, this is not you, and you cannot be yourself, which is not fair. You should be yourself. You should be you, wherever you are. But it's easier for them, and they pay less cost when they are masking and hiding it, rather than when they are saying, "Oh, I'm actually."
It's the attention.
When they feel like they can be themselves, which I think obviously that's why a lot of neurodiverse individuals may jump straight to masking, because they feel like they can't really be themselves with anyone else, or they try being themselves. Something's happened where it's backfired, like, drastically, and then they go back to that default because they know it works. I think when you're a kid at school, or like high school, like, it's sort of less of a concern, just because everybody's sort of still developing and sort of learning where they fit in. I think when you're an adult and actually you're forming connections and you're forming relationships, that's when you start to become, or when you're going for employment, that's when you start to become a little bit more aware of it, or more self-conscious about that aspect of yourself. And that's where the whole do I disclose on this application form whether I'm autistic or not? Do I talk about autism with these people? Is that it's knowing where you then stand.
In your experience, what would you normally go for in that kind of scenario?
Oh, I don't really know, because with my recent job applications, I've done a mixture of disclosing it and not disclosing it. I suppose for acting jobs, if I read a character description of a role and I think the role it's implied the role might have an autistic edge to them, I make a note of saying that. So I say, I also have a mild form of autism called Asperger's syndrome. Should that be relevant in any way to my application?
Sure.
And sometimes I just don't, and sometimes I might be lucky enough to be offered an audition, so I just turn up on the day. I'm just like, hi guys, any questions you want to ask about me?
Fair enough. So it's kind of a mixed bag in your experience.
Yeah, so a bit of a mixed bag depending on the setting.
Sure.
And my current job I've got at the moment, I didn't disclose it at first. I think when I got there, and when I started working there, and when I started to get into a bit of a routine, that's when I sort of started to drop the hints, as it were. I sort of started to say, oh yeah, I'm neurodiverse, I've got autism, and I think that's where that awareness came from it. So I think once they sort of got to know me a bit more, I think that's where I could sort of drop it there, and they were like, oh yeah, no, that's really nice.
And again, like you said earlier, was there kind of like a relief when you said it, like just so it's no longer like a thing that's dwelling?
I think it was, because there wasn't really a reaction from it to sort of give it away. It was normalised at that point, whereas in the past, like various job interviews, there's always been that pattern of either interesting, or like a acknowledgement.
Like,
Yeah, almost like a small red flag's gone up in your head, or something like that. So I talk about in the show, you get those one or two reactions, and then that sets up how they see you for the rest of the day. And then you sort of go with the back of your head saying, oh, they reacted like this, that means they must not like me, or oh, they said this, that means they must be interested in me. So again, it's sort of knowing where you stand.
Sure.
In those types of settings.
Okay. Right, so to close the podcast today, what message of encouragement would you send to individuals that they are outside there, that are autistic? Just to tell, what would you tell them? Making it difficult for you, Daniel, today.
Oh yeah, man, making me work for it today. I would say, those of you that are on the spectrum, out there in the world, don't be afraid to be fearless, if that makes sense. Yes, you're going to need. There are times when you are going to need to take risks, and there are times when they might not pay off, or that you might not get the reaction you were hoping for. But that's normal. That's part of life, and it's knowing when to then pick yourself back up and then move on to the next thing. And I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. It's to never stop being curious as well, and never stop trying to make discoveries about other people or yourselves. If there's a group of people out there that aren't that keen on you, don't worry. There are people out there that will be. It doesn't have to be solely down to a specific group of individuals or an organisation, because the world now is a bit of a better place, and autism's starting to be more understood by everybody now. So
yeah,
I say just be yourself, because that's the best version of yourself you can be.
Good.
That's
Well,
great.
thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Let us know where is your next show, what time, all of these things. So if someone wants to go and pop round,
Yes,
highly recommended, by the way.
absolutely. So the show is called Mine or Unapologetically Autistic, and it's a one-man show about what life is like growing up on the autistic spectrum and how autism is portrayed in the media. The next showing is on at the Etc. Theatre in Camden Town on Sunday the 22nd of October, both at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. So it's one show after the next.
Okay.
Great stuff. Awesome.
Well, in the meanwhile, just for everybody to remember that we do some meetings here for parents, carers, if they want to come and put their questions here at the Fieldhouse Barn. Next one is next month. We will put all the information in the on Facebook and in the media.
Yep. That's great.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
today,
Thank you,
Daniel.
Tony.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Our
been great.
pleasure.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today on the fourth episode. Is the fourth episode
It
of
is
On the
indeed.
Spectrum podcast. So thank you very much for listening. Please do subscribe to our channel. And until next time,
Stay on the spectrum.